Welcome everybody to our tubing of the biopsy session. And the idea of this particular session is to pay attention to the techniques that are necessary to avoid ending up with a no result. And that no result could be either because you don't have any DNA in the PCR tube, or you've got contamination of that DNA that leads to a noisy signal, and therefore, again, you can't get a result from that particular biopsy. I think they're up here, okay. So, my name's Stephen Fleming, and most importantly, the washing of the biopsy and the tubing will be demonstrated by Stacy Macpherson. So I'm going to just go through these slides initially, and then we'll cut over to where she is doing the tubing, and then you'll be able to see on the screen how she goes about washing the biopsy and doing the tubing. So with the CooperSurgical tubing kit, you get some PCR tubes, you get a vial of buffer, and you get a rack. And you need to prepare these PCR tubes by preloading them with 2 microliters of CooperSurgical buffer and immediately close the lid. So when you're putting these PCR tubes into your rack, make sure the lid is closed. Only open the lid when you're going to put the buffer into the PCR tube. This is all part of avoiding any extraneous contamination of that of the contents of that vial. Place them into the rack, and remember that the rack is sterile, so normally you'd be wearing aseptic, you'd be wearing personal protective equipment, so gloves, long sleeve gowns, mask over your nose, and a cap. And you would keep the rack on a cool block because you want to prevent any degradation of the DNA within the tube. At that stage, you can place a barcode labeled sticker onto the tube. And we recommend at that stage you don't write anything else on the tube, like number 1, number 2, etc. Don't do that until after you've actually put the biopsy into the tube. So again, just before you're ready to begin your washing of the biopsy, you'd prepare your washing dish. And the idea is that you have 4 drops of media so that you can do 3 washes and then transfer your biopsy into the PCR tube. And you want to make sure that you typically would put 20 microliter drops of the buffer into each well of your washing dish. And you want to minimize the carryover from one wash to the next. So the way you do that is you first of all prime your washing tip with your first media. Go and pick up your biopsy from your biopsy dish. Of course, you've already put your embryo away back in the incubator. And then you can wash in that first drop, and then any excess medium you expel into, you've got area around those 4 drops. And then you can then again prime your washing tip in the second drop and go and pick up your biopsy from the first drop, move it to the second drop, wash it, again expel any excess buffer, go to the third drop, same thing, prime the pipette in the third drop, pick up the biopsy, transfer it to the third drop, and wash it in the third drop. And then last of all, expel the excess medium, and then prime your pipette with the buffer from the 4th drop, and this is where you go to the third drop, pick up your biopsy, and put it into your biopsy tube. So it's 3 washes and into the PCR tube. And what we recommend is that you actually have enough buffer in that pipette tip so that when you drop the biopsy into the PCR tube and you watch it go into the PCR tube, you've got sufficient buffer still in the pipette to then check that you have indeed expelled that biopsy into the PCR tube. So you can flush out the rest of that buffer and check that the biopsy isn't still remaining in the pipette. So what we also recommend is that you position the PCR tube so the lid can be over the edge of a Petri dish, for example, and you've got the bottom of the tube resting on the bottom of the dish, and then you've still got two hands free. You can move the dish, and you can go into the PCR tube and drop your biopsy into the 2 microliters that are already there. So what you want to avoid is ending up with media in that PCR tube that's more than 2.5 microliters, okay? So not too much. It's also, of course, important that you have somebody witnessing that you've put that biopsy from the correct washing dish into the correct PCR tube. And once you've put the lid on that PCR tube, you could then microfuge it, just briefly, just to make sure that the biopsy goes to the bottom of the tube. And you can then put it back into your rack, and when you've finished, you can close up your rack and put it into minus 20 degrees C until you can do the shipping. But it's really important that you have witnessing, double witnessing of each of those steps where you go from the biopsy dish to the washing dish and from the washing dish to the PCR tube. And that's it. And we'll go over now and see Stacy actually do some washing and tubing. So bear in mind that Stacy is not wearing any PPE, but she would normally be in a clinical situation. And also, she doesn't have the benefit of a microfuge there either. But we do really recommend you have a microfuge to make sure that you get the biopsy to the bottom of the PCR tube. And believe it or not, washing and tubing is more difficult than biopsying. So practice this at least as much as you practice your biopsy. Maybe afterwards, yeah. We'll just see how to do this. Okay, so Stacy's picked up the biopsy, I think, or maybe it's in there. Yep, it's in that drop. You can see it there. And now she's just washing it through the different washing drops. So priming her pipette with media. And then picking up the biopsy and then washing it in the next drop. So now she's ready to do the tubing. She's done those 3 washes. You can see the 2 microliters of buffer in the bottom of the tube. So this is where you need to watch carefully. You can see the biopsy come out of the pipette tip there. It looks easy, but I can tell you that you need to practice it. And there we go. So again, feel free to have a go at doing this after this very nice demonstration. Now she's just checking her pipette tip to make sure that the biopsy did indeed end up in the PCR tube. So if you do your washing religiously, you keep your PCR tube capped when you're not doing anything with it, you should minimize your no result rate to a very low percentage. So thanks for your attention, and good luck with your washing and your tubing.